I'm just going to read you this statement that Father Hans has published yesterday. Just make a small commentary on this because I think it's extremely timely and important that we listen to what this Jesuit has to say. Statement by Father Hans Zollner on the 29th of March 2023. After serving as a member of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors for the past 9 years, I submitted my resignation, which was accepted on 14th of March 2023. I would like to thank the President, the members and the staff of the Commission, both past and present, who share in the hope of building a safer church. The protection of children and vulnerable persons must be at the heart of the Catholic Church's mission. That was the hope I and many others have shared since the Commission was first established in 2014. However, in my work with the Commission, I have noticed issues that need to be urgently addressed and which have made it impossible for me to continue further. Over the last years, I have grown increasingly concerned with how the Commission, in my perception, has gone about achieving that goal, particularly in areas of responsibility, compliance, accountability and transparency. I am convinced that these are principles that any church institution, let alone the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, is bound to uphold. With regard to compliance, there has been a lack of clarity regarding the selection process of members of staff and their respective roles and responsibilities. Another area of concern is that of financial accountability, which I believe is inadequate. It is paramount for the Commission to clearly show how funds are used in its works. Furthermore, there should be transparency in how decisions are taken in the Commission. Too often there was insufficient information and vague communication with members on how particular decisions were made. Lastly, I am unaware of any regulations that govern the relationship between the Commission and the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith, since the Commission was placed within the Dicastery last June. It is due to these structural and practical issues that led me to disassociate myself with the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. I intend to focus on my new role as consultant for the Diocese of Rome, as well as director for the Institute of Anthropology, in the pursuit of making the world a safer place for children and vulnerable persons through our academic and scientific endeavours. I remain open to discuss safeguarding with the Commission and hope that the aforementioned issues can be resolved in a sustainable way. Father Hans Zollner, Jesuit. When it comes to dealing with abuse, I think the big question that is often asked within the Catholic Church is, why didn't those who knew do more? The abuse sometimes isn't the worst, because I think the world can deal with the human reality, the fallen human reality. What many in the church find it very hard to deal with is when abuse is known, when they know that a priest has done something and they cover it up and they move people around. When the Father Marcial saga came out, we found out that the Jesuits knew in 1941. This was known within the church. They had an investigation under Pope Pius XII in the 1950s, and Father Marcial was expelled from the Legions of Christ, expelled from Rome, and he managed to work his way back into the Legion, into the church. And, his way of leadership in the church, in the Legion, was extremely damaging to many people. The way he led as a man, as a leader, because he wasn't a spiritual leader. He was more like a semi-political leader within the church, using lots of tactics that you would find with dictators to control his power within the Legion. And it was known in the 1990s as well, when victims started to abuse, the whole operation came alive to defend him, blah blah blah. And as somebody who lived through that and saw the fallout afterwards of so many men that have had their lives destroyed by going through an institution that had bad leadership. Bad leadership, no accountability. And when I read this letter, and it's showing lack of transparency and all this, I said, this is something we've seen again and again and again. It's not just the protection of minors, it's the protection of vulnerable adults. They also need a voice in the church. When somebody goes into a community and gives their life to a community, we should expect that they be protected, that they be helped, and so on. And too often in the church, we see bad leadership, either at diocesan level or at religious level, where people are allowed into institutions or are allowed positions of leadership that haven't been properly vetted. If you're going to found a community, and I'm glad the Vatican has changed this, but if you're going to found a community, it shouldn't be up to one bishop to decide, okay, is this person apt to lead a community where people would place their trust and their faith in this man. There has to be more scrutiny, more background checks, because otherwise what we end up are with people's lives destroyed and loss of faith and confidence in the church. If you go into an institution or a community and they abuse your conscience, or they abuse you physically or mentally or psychologically and all this, it can take years to recover. And some people don't recover. They are left scarred for life. I've seen this. I've seen it personally. I know people, I could name them. And it's extremely sad to see in the church that this mentality is still alive. Father Hans is calling it out again. And it can't be brushed under the carpet anymore. The church cannot brush this under the carpet. The McCarrick report can't be brushed under the carpet. McCarrick didn't arrive up there unknown to become a cardinal. He was flagged time and time and time again. And it's time for bishops and those in the church to stand up and demand transparency. The church can deal with weakness. Weakness is one thing, but knowingly covering up abuse, knowingly covering up for those who have abused and moving them around and giving them, and being naive to think, oh, he's repented, he's a new man. Go and repent on an isolated island and be a saint there. Don't be putting priests, religious, back into communities to give them positions of leadership over vulnerable people. Sometimes it's hard when you're curing cancer and it demands things to be cut. And this is what the church needs to do. It needs to understand. Otherwise, how are we going to change? All of this loses, we create a loss of sense of faith in the church, in the institutions, in bishops. Because, I think people can understand abuse, but when that abuse is covered up and perpetuated, when the abuser is rehabilitated and he goes on to abuse again, what happened? What happened? And it's still happening in the church. It's still happening. We know this. Priests that are not prepared, that don't have the leadership skills, the proven leadership skills to lead communities, are still being allowed to found communities, are still being allowed to go under the radar. And the church, unless it deals with this, the next biggest crisis in the church will be the abuse of vulnerable adults. It won't be the abuse of children. It'll be the abuse of vulnerable adults who go in to communities and who end up traumatized. And this has to be addressed in the church. So, I'm glad Father Hans has come out. It was a sad day yesterday. On the one hand, the reports inside the Vatican is that the Holy Father had a stroke or a heart attack, one or the other. This report, bombshell, has come out. Father Hans, placed there by the Holy Father, a Jesuit, placed in there by the Holy Father, who does not have confidence in the church's structures to reform in this area. So we have to pray. We have to hope that, the church will realize it is time for transparency and clarity around how the church deals with cases of abuse at all levels, not just physical, but also psychological, mental, spiritual abuse of adults in the church. You know, when somebody places themselves in a religious community, there should be clear rules in place, clear structures in place, and leadership that is able to develop that man in religious life or woman in religious life. Real leaders that are able to develop religious life. Not leaders coming into the church with, oh, I'm going to reinvent this. I know better. I've had this amazing mystical experience and I'm going to transform my community. No, it's time, and I'm glad that there has been change in the Vatican, but we need to strengthen existing religious communities that have good leadership in place. Because people, you know, when it's done badly, it destroys. And people will rightly ask the Catholic Church for a higher level of accountability. This isn't a company or an organization or an NGO with failings. This is a church talking about what is right and wrong, you know, the morality of our acts. And then, you know, we fail to do our own examination of conscience as an institution on how we're going to reform. So you cannot reform without accountability and transparency. And I will call out here the traditional movement, and I will call out, for example, the Society of St. Pius X, that are not immune to these problems. That there are systemic leadership problems in the traditional movement as well, where superiors are covering up for abuse of minors, allowing those priests to move around without giving accountability for what they did. And when this all comes out, because it will, it always does, it always comes out, it destroys faith in these institutions, in these fraternities, and it will come down, because Christ cannot stand the duplicity, the hypocrisy, you know. Anyway, I give this in good spirit, and I speak from experience when I talk about these things, that there has to be a change in how we lead in the church, how we help in the church. There has to be transparency. There has to be accountability. If there is not these things in the church, we will never change. God bless you. Take care. Bye bye.